Hey everybody, welcome to GeoSurface TerraZoner. My name is Simon Knutson and I'm the developer of TerraZoner. So let me show you how it works. I'll give you a quick run through and I'm going to show you 4 different ways that you can zone a field using TerraZoner. So first thing to do is upload a field boundary, and that can be either a shapefile in a zipped folder like I did then, or it could be a KML, KMZ file as well. And make sure your boundary has any areas of non-cultivated bush, slough, things like that clipped out. It should just represent your cultivated acres. So the first and most common way of zoning is going to be creating a multi-year using historical NDVI. So once you've loaded your boundary, you can click on that Fetch NDVI button. Once you've done it once for one field, it'll actually cache the layers so they load up super quick, but you can always clear that out if you want to as well, and it'll download fresh data. It won't be any different, but it will. So once you've downloaded, you can see here I've got individual years from 2016 to 2025. And what we're looking at here is peak season biomass. You can rotate through the previews just by clicking on these little preview buttons next to each year. And what you're looking to do here is just select which years look good and which ones don't. So this year, for example, often you're finding 2016, because the Sentinel satellites had only just been put into service, some of that data is a little suspect. And especially if you're seeing something in 2015 or 2016 and it doesn't look quite right, then just leave that one out. On this field, everything else actually does look pretty good. So to choose the years that you would like to create your zones from, you simply check them on here. So when they turn green, that means we're going to use them for our multi-year composite zones. We do also fetch basic weather information based on rainfall during the growing season for each year as well. So it just gives you an idea against the mean or the average for that region, what they were sitting at for that particular year, and you may or may not choose to use that to help you build different zones as well. Once you're happy that you've selected your years for the inputs, you can then click on Create Zones, and it's going to bring you to the Zone tab automatically, and it'll automatically create 3 zones using natural breaks. You can change the classification method to go through a few of the common ones. I would recommend sticking with natural breaks unless you have a particular reason not to. And you can adjust the number of zones here from anywhere between 2 and 10 zones. Once you make an adjustment, it'll create the zones again automatically here, and you'll be able to preview those, and if you mouse over, you can see what they represent. You can also adjust the minimum blob size, so we call any little included areas like this one, this yellow area here, and surrounded by the green, that would be a blob. It's a contiguous group of zone 2 pixels in this case. So if you're finding you're getting a lot of really small inclusions and maybe the equipment isn't going to be able to handle that so well, you can increase that blob size. You could also decrease it if you want even more detail in the zones. And you can also add some smoothing as well, so it'll just smooth out around the zone transition areas a little bit. And you can slide our transparency slider up and down if you want to just see, what the zones look like in relation to the satellite imagery in the background, and see what makes sense. You also have full control of the individual zone breaks, so you can create different sizes of each zone. Like if I slide zone 1 up, for example, then it'll make zone 1 bigger. If I bring the slider down, it'll make zone 1 smaller. So again, you can use that to really tweak the zone breaks how you would like. And another trick here as well could be that if you wanted to end up with, say, 3 or 4 zones, you could actually start with more and then use the merge tool to actually then merge zones together. And this is actually quite a popular function. So you could say, for example, you were going to actually merge zone 1 and zone 2, and we can merge those together. So now you can see we've got just 4 zones, and our zone 1 now is made up of what was zone 1 and zone 2. Sometimes you get slightly different results doing it that way than if you just selected 4 zones up here to begin with. So again, you have complete control over what you want to do, or you can just leave it at the defaults and work with that. Once you're happy that you've created your zones for the field how you like them, you can then export them. So we export out primarily in shapefile format because that's what all of the controllers expect, or if you're going to load it into another software that you're using for your farm management. So it'll be a shapefile zipped up, and you'll just need to extract it so that you can use it. And we've also got a few other formats as well. So the KMZ, for example, you can overlay that in Google Maps, Google Earth, and create a PDF. You can also back up and restore your project here as well. So you can come back and it'll restore the settings that you had. We do also have a prescription creator right here in the tool as well. So you can either use your current zones, or you could re-import a shapefile that you exported in a previous session. You need to give it a name, and you can choose up to 6 products, and then you can enter the rate for each product. So this will just be as the controller will read it, and then you can export that out as a shapefile as well. And we've tested those with most of the controllers, like the John Deere simulators, for example. Load these up, no problem. And that's another option for you as well, even to use that if you need a quick prescription in the field or something. This is also could be a tool that you can use for that. So that's the first method of zoning, and probably 75% of users, that's what you're going to be doing in TerraZoner, and you can do this for any field pretty well anywhere in the world as long as you have a boundary for it. The other 3 methods you'll find in the Topo tab, because these all involve using topography of some description to either create or refine the zones. So when you come to the Topo tab, you can do this either when you just have a field boundary loaded, if you're purely doing the terrain zones, and if you're working with refined or dual layer zones, you'll first need to come into the zone tab and create your initial zones in here so that you can then refine them later on. Another trick here is the matrix, the 3x3 matrix zones. You will need 3 zones set up in the zone tab here for that to work, and I'll talk about that when I get to it. So let's go back over to the Topo tab, and ideally you're then going to use LiDAR data. So if you're in the US, pretty well everywhere is covered. If you're in Canada, we can also turn on and view to check that the areas, you can see this field has LiDAR coverage. If you're in the US, just turn on the US, and you can also check the coverage there. And once you've confirmed that there is LiDAR, then let's just click on Fetch and Process LiDAR. We fetch it, we send it to our cloud server, and it actually runs an analysis on the data, and we end up loading up a unique elevation-based index layer. Once you've loaded elevation, you can then also start to view your field in 3D. So at the moment, these are just our initial zones, our 3 zones. But now we can see what it looks like actually in 3D, and we can start to see, for example, some of these zone 1 red areas. Obviously, these are in low-lying areas, so probably in depressions. But also up here, we've got this zone 1, which is clearly on a ridge or on a hilltop, and some over here as well. So at the moment, we've got one of the classic situations with NDVI zones that the hilltops and the wet spots end up getting clumped together in the same zone. And I'm going to show you first here the refined zone. So the middle button here, this is the one of the most popular tools that we have in TerraZoner. And what this does is it'll take your initial zone, so it takes the zone 1, and once we've loaded that topography reference source, it then splits that into either dry limited or wet limited. So you can see here we've actually now, instead of 3 zones, we've got 4 zones, because we actually replaced our original zone 1 and we split it up. And if we look now, we should see that all of these low-lying areas have suddenly turned blue. So that means these are low producing, probably wet limited. And these hilltops over here have turned brown. So those are low producing, probably dry limited zones. So we're able to split this out and kind of eliminate one of the big criticisms of satellite and NDVI based zones. So that's the second method that you can use to create your zones. And you can also even refine this even more. So let's say I do something like this, recreate the zones. You can actually then split it up into dry limited, wet limited, and other limited. In this case, the other would be, maybe where it's not super wet and it's not super dry. It could be something else that is impacting the productivity in those areas. On this field, it's very small, probably doesn't make sense. So we should just keep these at 50-50. But on some fields, especially larger fields, you may well find that it makes sense to do that. So you may start with 3 zones and end up with 5, if that's what makes sense on the field. So that's the second method that we have to create the zones. And again, whatever zones are loaded in the whatever you're looking at on the screen, if you go to export and you export the shapefile or any of the other exports, and this is what you're going to export. You can only ever have one set of zones loaded. That is the active zone set. That's what gets exported. Let's come back over to the Topo tab again, and this time we're going to create the dual layer zones. So this one is a little more complex, because what we're doing here, let me just create it and then I can explain it. What we're doing here is we're actually classifying based on not only productivity, but we're also adding in a classifier for the wetness potential of the field as well at every location. So what you end up with is somewhere up to 9 zones. You don't always get 9, because we have a minimum zone size here. It defaults to 5 acres, and if any of the zones that it would have created are smaller than 5 acres, they get merged into the next most logical zone. So in this case, we have zone 1, 2, 3. We're missing a zone 4 because it was probably below 5 acres. And then we have 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. And what we do here, let me just actually make this minimum zone size a bit smaller and see if we can generate all 9. There we go. So what we do is we firstly have 3 dry zones. So we have dry low producing, dry average producing, and dry higher producing. And I'll see here, so if I mouse over this area, we know this is that hilltop, that ridge. And now we've classified it as dry low producing. The yellow areas are dry average producing. Let's see if I can find one. There's one little strip here. So these are the drier average producing areas, and then we have drier high producing. We then move into balanced. So this is kind of in the middle of the wetness, not particularly wet versus the average for the field, but not particularly dry. And then we move into the wetter. So again, we can have up to 9 classes, and if you open the 3D view with this loaded, and you can mouse over, and you can start to see. So in this case, some of these parts of the field actually the ridges produce, and on other parts of the field they don't. So we can separate those out. We can see down here that we've got some low producing. It may well be a wet area there, just because it's right up at the field boundary. It may not have fully detected what was going on over here. We've got these wet areas through here, obviously, and those are wet, low producing. And in other parts of the field, you can see here we've got a wet zone, but it's actually high producing. So again, you get a very different look at the field, and every field comes out quite unique. And sometimes you can see trends in here that you otherwise wouldn't have seen. And the feedback we've had from a lot of agronomists looking at this is it may be useful information even if you don't use it for your variable rate zones. It could still be really useful just to have this as a layer when you're out scouting the field or when you're trying to explain certain yield patterns and things like that. So it's another option in the tool. So that was the third version, and again, if you wanted to export those zones, you just hit export shapefile. It'll then export these zones out as your shapefile. The final option here is to export pure terrain zones. So what we're talking about here is just purely based on the terrain and essentially the wetness potential that we create. When you fetch that LiDAR data, it sends it to our server, we process it, and we turn it into a wetness index. So this doesn't use the satellite imagery at all. You can come over here and do this without even fetching the NDVI. And what this does is classifies purely based on, again, based on terrain, based on topography from the elevation data. And again, by default, you end up with 3 zones, and you may want to make changes to this one. So you get a zone 1, which is always at the drier end. So this is where we can see we knew that we had these ridges here. Zone 2 is kind of the balanced, so these would be more like your mid slopes. And zone 3 are the wetter areas. Again, there is no consideration for productivity here at all. This is purely based on topography. And in this case, you may see some differences when you do use the different classifications. So if you want everything more balanced, for example, to have the same number of acres in each zone, you might want to choose quantiles. And that'll give you some more of these. Maybe the hilltops will classify into zone 1 then. This one you need to play around a little bit and see what works, because again, every field is going to come out slightly differently. But you can use that tool to do that, and you also have these controlling sliders here as well, so you can tweak those breaks and make it line up with what you can see maybe in the underlying imagery. So that was method number 4, and again, you would now be able to export these zones out. If you went to the export tab, you choose export shapefile, and that's what you're going to export out of here. So again, it's a pretty simple tool. It runs in your web browser. No software to install. Better to have a bigger screen and a mouse, but in theory it will work even on a larger tablet or an iPad or something. And yeah, it works anywhere in the world for the NDVI and creating these multi-year zones. If you are looking to create some of the more topography-based zones, then either you need to be in LiDAR coverage, or you can actually import your own shapefile as well. There is a tutorial video on that. So if you've got RTK quality data, maybe that came out of a combine or something, or a tractor that drove up and down the field and it was logging RTK, we can use that, and we can actually create the same layers from that as well. If you need help with any of that kind of data, just shoot us a message through the contact form. We can then respond back and forth and take a look, see what needs to be done. So yeah, hopefully that is useful. It's about a 20-minute walkthrough, and hopefully I've been able to show you pretty much everything that you can do in TerraZoner in that time. So hopefully we'll see you on board soon.